Let me tell you something strange about people who go crazy. We live in a world that believes madness arrives suddenly. A snap, a break, a moment where everything falls apart. Yet some people don't fall. They fray. Slowly, quietly, over years that no one was watching. And here's the question that always lingers beneath the surface. What if going crazy isn't the beginning of the story, but the end of a very long one? It's easy to assume instability means weakness, that something inside them was always broken, that they couldn't handle life the way others do. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one that has less to do with fragility and more to do with endurance. See, for some people, losing their mind isn't about chaos. It's about carrying too much order for too long. It's about holding yourself together when no one is helping you hold anything at all. This isn't a judgment. It's an attempt to understand how someone survives quietly until surviving becomes unbearable. You can often recognize them before everything unravels. They're functional, reliable, the ones who keep going when others stop. They show up, they respond, they do what's expected. They don't complain much, if at all. From the outside they seem stable, responsible, composed, but inside, something else is happening, a slow accumulation. Thought after thought, emotion after emotion, memory stacked on memory without release. Psychologists have noticed something fascinating here. People who eventually break are often the ones who adapted too well. They learned early how to regulate themselves without support, how to anticipate moods, how to read rooms, how to minimize needs, how to stay quiet when speaking didn't lead to safety. Over time, this adaptation begins to look like strength. But here's the reframe. It's not about being strong. It's about never being allowed to be weak. For many, the brutal past doesn't look dramatic. There wasn't always violence or shouting or obvious trauma. Sometimes the past is brutal because of what didn't happen. No one noticed when you were overwhelmed. No one helped you name what you felt. No one taught you how to release emotion safely. So you learned to contain it. You learned to stay composed. You learned to survive without repair. And the nervous system remembers that. At first, this inner containment feels like control. You feel capable, independent, self-sufficient. You pride yourself on not needing much, on handling things alone, on being the calm one. But containment without release has a cost. Emotions don't disappear when they're ignored. They wait, they settle into the body. They find quieter ways to express themselves. Here's what's often misunderstood. People assume those who go crazy couldn't handle pressure. But often, they handled too much for too long. What disappeared wasn't resilience. It was capacity. There's a psychological concept beneath this chronic emotional suppression. Not the occasional holding back, but the long-term habit of swallowing experience to maintain function. When feelings aren't processed relationally, the mind compensates. It becomes hypervigilant. Overthinking becomes a way to control uncertainty. Rumination becomes a substitute for resolution. The brain stays on, always scanning, always preparing, because, let's be honest, most of what we call stability is performance. We reward composure, productivity, emotional restraint. We praise people who keep it together, and rarely do we ask what it costs them to do so. In a culture that glorifies endurance, breaking becomes shameful, so people hide the cracks, even from themselves. For many, the past that leads to madness is shaped by silence, years of being the listener instead of the speaker, the mediator instead of the protected one, the responsible child, the emotionally mature partner, the one who absorbs tension so others don't have to. Over time, their inner world grows crowded. At first, they try to manage it. They journal, they distract, they intellectualize, they tell themselves it's fine. They compare their pain to others and decide it doesn't count. They keep functioning, and for a while, that works. Until it doesn't. Think about it. When was the first time you realized you were carrying more than you could name? When was the moment you stopped asking for help and started managing yourself instead? And what part of you learned that lesson quietly and never forgot it? Because not everyone who goes crazy does so from nowhere. Some do it from exhaustion, from disillusionment, from holding contradictions without support. The same mind that learns to survive complexity eventually collapses under it. This is where the paradox emerges. The behaviors we admire, self-control, independence, emotional restraint, are the same ones that can quietly dismantle someone from the inside. The system was designed to reward composure, yet it often leaves people alone with what composure hides. There's an existential layer here, because to suppress yourself long enough is to slowly lose contact with who you are. You stop knowing what you feel until it erupts. You stop trusting your perceptions until they distort. You begin to live in your head because your body feels unsafe. Reality starts to blur, not because you're detached from it, but because you were never allowed to process it fully. This is where people say, they went crazy. But what if what really happened is that the mind finally stopped compensating? The longer someone lives this way, the more fragile the balance becomes. Small stresses feel enormous. Thoughts loop without resolution. Sleep fragments. Emotions feel disproportionate, not because they're new, but because they've been waiting. And when they arrive all at once. Science offers a quiet validation here. Research shows that prolonged emotional suppression increases stress hormone activity and disrupts emotional regulation. The brain becomes efficient but rigid. It handles routine well, but struggles with unpredictability. When the load exceeds capacity, symptoms emerge not as failure, but as signal. And yet, people shaped by this past are often deeply perceptive, sensitive, intelligent. Their breakdown isn't emptiness, it's overflow. Their madness isn't chaos. It's accumulated meaning without outlet. Sometimes that's why it looks dramatic. When the mind has been holding structure for years, its release feels extreme. Thoughts race because they were silenced. Emotions surge because they were delayed. Identity fragments because it was never allowed to be whole. But here's what's rarely said. Not everyone who breaks wants to disappear. Some are trying to finally exist. Some are trying to feel something honestly for the first time. Some are trying to be heard by themselves after years of internal silence. Maybe that's what the brutal past really is. Not the pain itself, but the loneliness of carrying it alone. Not the trauma, but the lack of attunement afterward. Not what happened, but what never healed. So when you see someone unravel, maybe pause before judging the moment. Ask what it took for them to stay together as long as they did. Ask what parts of themselves they had to abandon to survive. Ask what finally demanded to be seen. If this feels familiar, you don't need to label yourself. You don't need to dramatize it. You don't need to explain your history to anyone. Awareness doesn't require performance, because going crazy doesn't always mean losing reality. Sometimes it means reality finally breaking through years of silence. Sometimes it means the mind refusing to carry what the heart was never meant to hold alone. And maybe the most radical form of healing isn't becoming normal again. Maybe it's allowing yourself to integrate what was once unbearable, slowly, gently, in your own time. In the end, madness isn't always the absence of reason. Sometimes it's the presence of too much unspoken truth. And the past that leads there isn't weak. It's relentless. Perhaps the real question isn't why some people go crazy. Perhaps it's how so many stay sane for so long without being seen.